If you agree that true warriors don't need permission to be great, they just need a chance, then like and subscribe, because this is the story of a woman who never raised her voice, never raised her hand, and yet somehow became the most feared ghost in U.S. military history, though not before being laughed out of every room she ever walked into. It all started with a locked locker in a dusty sub-basement of the Pentagon, buried beneath 6 layers of clearance and 3 decades of silence. And when a junior analyst opened it during an equipment audit, they found a battered duffel, a torn field notebook with bloodstains that didn't match any known DNA, and a single name printed across the back in faded Sharpie: Specter. What came next triggered a ripple through the intelligence community, because inside the notebook were location coordinates tied to missions that were never approved and files on insurgents who had disappeared before they were ever on official radars, along with one final page, a list of recruiters' names, all crossed out in black ink. And that's where our story begins. Not in the Pentagon, not in combat, but years earlier in a strip mall recruiting center just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Eva Linwood, 28 years old, former linguistics grad student and third-degree black belt, walked in wearing jeans, a faded hoodie, and carrying a dossier she'd typed herself outlining her qualifications and asking, politely, how to join Army intelligence. The sergeant at the desk didn't even glance up, just nodded at the clipboard like she was there to audition for a commercial, not a war. And when she listed her fluency in Russian, Farsi, and Mandarin, he raised one brow and asked if she'd learned that from YouTube. Then circled clerical support under the options and told her the Special Forces pipeline wasn't for ladies with perfect nails. Eva didn't flinch, didn't argue. She just nodded, signed what she had to sign, and spent the next year working harder than anyone in her unit, but somehow still being seen as the one who tried really hard, never the one who belonged. They stuck her with radio watch, inventory, paperwork, anything but field work. And when her CO caught her running extra PT sessions at dawn and studying encryption textbooks by flashlight, he said she was wasting energy on stuff above her pay grade, not realizing that someone else had been watching her all along. An advisor from JSOC embedded with their unit for a routine logistics audit, who watched her reroute a scrambled comms tower in under 7 minutes after a blackout, and then disappear before anyone could say thank you. That advisor sent one email, just one, with the subject line Linwood, to someone in a 3-letter agency, and from there, everything changed. One night, she was doing inventory on MRE crates. The next, she was gone, reassigned under orders so classified her own commanding officer wasn't briefed, and what came after wasn't boot camp. It was interrogation resistance training, cryptography under duress, escape simulations that made SEAL candidates quit halfway through, and even never raised her voice once. The instructors called her spectral, quiet, calculating, precise, and the name stuck, Specter. But none of that was public, not even in whisper networks, because Specter didn't exist, not on paper, not in logs, not even in the barracks. She slept wherever she landed and moved like smoke, showing up just long enough to steal secrets from diplomats' safes or walk through enemy checkpoints undetected, always vanishing before anyone remembered her face. She completed 17 missions in her first year, each one deniable, each one folded into a different agency's ledger, and every time a mission went sideways in ways no one could explain. Hostages rescued before negotiations began, a rogue general captured in a city where no ops were approved. Someone in the Pentagon would pause, glance at the map, and mutter, "Was that Specter?" Even though officially, she'd been discharged for a lack of aptitude just 6 months after enlisting. But Eva never cared about medals or recognition. She was chasing something else entirely, proof that the silence they forced on people like her could become its own kind of power. Still, there was a shadow that followed her. Those recruiters back in Tulsa who thought she'd never rise above desk duty, who laughed when she asked about special forces, who never saw the storm behind her silence. And while they forgot her name, she never forgot theirs. They were the first line in her notebook, the first crossed-out names in the ledger of people who underestimated her. And now, years later, that notebook had surfaced in the Pentagon's forgotten locker, its ink still legible, its secrets now out. And the analyst holding it realized the only thing scarier than a trained operative was a trained operative no one ever believed in. Eva Linwood was dismissed, overlooked, brushed aside. Until the system accidentally created its most dangerous ghost. One who moved without needing permission, who proved that sometimes the most unstoppable soldiers are the ones who were never supposed to fight in the first place. They say ghosts don't exist, but tell that to the warlord in Kandahar, who vanished mid-transaction after laughing in the face of U.S. negotiations, or the Russian asset in Prague who found his safe house compromised 48 hours before anyone in NATO even realized he'd switched sides. Because in each case, there were no drones, no teams, no trace. Just one name whispered in briefing rooms lined with stars and secrets. Specter. By now, evil Linwood had become more myth than memory, spoken of only in rooms without phones and folders that dissolved after being read. Because she didn't just work for Special Activities Division, she redefined it. Her clearance wasn't just top secret, it was buried under protocol layers that didn't technically exist, and only 3 people on Earth were cleared to contact her directly. 2 of them generals, and one of them someone who didn't officially exist at all. Her missions weren't assignments. They were last resorts, moments when even SEALs said no, when tech failed, and the brass needed someone who could slip into a hurricane wearing only instinct and nerve. In Lagos, she posed as a translator during a weapons deal and walked out with a briefcase that detonated the entire smuggling network from the inside. No casualties, no witnesses, just the sudden collapse of a criminal empire that had lasted decades. In Lebanon, she spent 6 weeks embedded in a rebel stronghold, gaining intel that prevented the bombing of a U.S. embassy. Never seen, never recorded, and when a senator tried to investigate how it happened, the report just read, "Situation resolved. Recommend no further inquiry." Specter. Her skill wasn't just her fluency or her fighting, though those were impeccable. It was her ability to become whatever the mission needed, whether that meant slipping past thermal scans or enduring days of silence in a crawl space waiting for one perfect moment. And still, even among her handlers, she said little, asked for nothing, and vanished between debriefs like she'd never been there at all. But behind that icy precision was a ledger Eva kept in her head, a quiet tally not of enemies taken down, but of rooms she wasn't welcome in. Each mission a quiet response to the recruiter who told her she'd make a great secretary, to the commander who suggested she smile more during drills, to every smug nod that came after calling her kiddo or missy before she rewired their entire communication system. And the deeper she went into the black, the more power she held, until eventually her legend began to ripple outwards. Not from those she worked with, she rarely did, but from those left behind in her wake, enemies and allies alike who all told the same strange story. They never saw her coming, and they never saw her leave, and back in the Pentagon, the whispers grew louder. Every time a diplomat was extracted from behind enemy lines without explanation, every time an op failed, but somehow the objective still got accomplished, someone would lean back in their chair and say, "That had to be Specter." But one mission changed everything. An American general went missing in the mountains of Turkmenistan after a rogue detachment turned on their handlers, and all efforts to reach him had failed. Satellites were jammed, recon teams lost contact, and the rescue proposal was already being shelved when a one-line message hit a private channel in Langley. "I'm already in country. Advise on extraction." And signed, untraceable, and unmistakable. Within 24 hours, the general walked into a NATO checkpoint alone, bloody but alive, clutching a patch from one of his captors and muttering a single word, "Specter." There was no debrief, no press release, no public ceremony. Just a new rule quietly added to the Pentagon's unspoken manual. When Specter calls, you don't ask questions. And still, Eva said nothing, didn't return to base, didn't collect medals. She simply moved on. Another operation, another ghost trail. But something had shifted, because now the brass wasn't just whispering about her. They were requesting her by name. And the more desperate the mission, the more likely that name appeared on the closed-door rosters. Yet not one of them knew her real story. Not really. Not the lonely barrack she started in. Not the recruiters who steered her wrong. Not the way she clawed her way into silence and made it her armor. They didn't know that Specter was born not from glory or ego, but from exclusion, carved out of rejection and reshaped into the thing no one could control, command, or fully understand. And while the world debated what made a hero, uniforms, badges, rank, Eva Linwood operated on an older truth. Sometimes the most valuable weapon in a war is the one they never see coming. It started like any other Tuesday. Coffee lukewarm, TV blaring, cable news nobody really watched, and free recruiters killing time between walk-ins in the same Tulsa office where they used to joke about wannabes and waste-of-time applicants. When the broadcast cut to breaking news, unauthorized intel leak unveils covert operative behind global black ops successes, and suddenly, the room froze. There on the screen wasn't a face, but a name, Specter, and one recruiter, a little older now, frowned and leaned forward, because that name, it scratched something buried, something forgotten, until the next slide came up, showing a blurry photo, taken through a cracked windshield in Kabul, of a woman in tactical gear leading a captured arms dealer out of a collapsed building. Calm as ever, face half turned toward the camera. The recruiter's cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the tile, and he said, barely audible, "That's Eva Linwood." The same woman he'd waved off years ago with a clipboard and a smirk, the one he told to aim lower, who he pushed toward clerical duty while mocking her resume behind closed doors, the one whose name he forgot because she never made noise, until now, because what followed wasn't a puff piece or rumor, it was a tidal wave, leaked ops logs from 6 years' worth of missions, each stamped with Specter's call sign, tied to real outcomes, real lives saved, real enemies neutralized long before they made it to anyone's radar. And while the government scrambled to contain the breach, the public didn't care about redacted lines or diplomatic fallout. They wanted to know who she was, and how someone so invisible could have carried the weight of wars on her back with no credit, no ceremony, no thanks. And as military analysts broke it down for the cameras, how Specter had been operating at a level no conventional force could match, how her infiltration skills had stopped attacks before they were even planned, how her name had appeared, and logs only 3 generals could see. Another clip surfaced, body cam footage from the general she rescued in Turkmenistan, showing her bleeding from a shrapnel wound while dragging him through smoke, covering their retreat with one arm and holding him upright with the other. "Who are you?" he'd asked, groaning in pain, and her voice, clear as day, had answered, "Nobody important, sir. Just Specter." And millions watching around the world got chills. But back in that recruiting office, nobody spoke, because the weight of their mistake hit like a freight train. They hadn't just misjudged her. They'd nearly erased her before she ever had the chance to fight. And then, the real gut punch. A journalist covering the story unearthed a scanned document, the original intake form Eva had filled out in that very office, with a note scrawled in the margins by a recruiter. "Talks big game. Pretty eyes. Desk material." And when that image hit social media, the fallout was nuclear. Veterans, soldiers, civilians, everyone lit up the internet with one shared sentiment. She didn't need a desk, she needed a mission. And though Eva never stepped forward, never made a statement, never basked in the spotlight, she wasn't forgotten this time. Within 48 hours, a congressional hearing was convened on gender bias in military recruitment, and someone painted a mural outside the Tulsa office, a silhouette in grayscale, rifle slung low, the name Specter etched below with the words, "You never saw her coming. Now you'll never forget her again." And while the recruiters dodged cameras and the Pentagon went into damage control, somewhere far off-grid, a woman quietly folded her gear into a duffel, slipped her notebook into her jacket, and walked alone across a border checkpoint with no name badge and no ID, nodding to a guard who pretended not to see her, because that's how it had always been. Eva Linwood didn't need them to clap for her, didn't need medals or parades. She wasn't built for show, she was built for moments that required silence, grit, and the kind of bravery that didn't scream. It whispered, and now, years after being brushed aside, underestimated, and nearly erased, she had become the most feared and respected phantom in modern warfare. Not because she wanted to prove them wrong, but because she never needed them to believe in her in the first place.